Man, think about it. July 1969. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, those guys supposedly stepped onto the moon. Michael Collins is orbiting above, probably feeling a bit left out, but hey, crucial job. This wasn't just some joyride, it was a monumental moment. The whole world, or at least a huge chunk of it, was glued to their grainy black and white TV sets. They heard Armstrong say, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." It's a line etched into history, right? It symbolized humanity reaching for something beyond our own planet, a huge, massive achievement. People were losing their minds with excitement and pride, especially in America. This Apollo 11 mission, it was the peak of the space race. The USA versus the Soviet Union. A Cold War battle fought not with missiles but with rockets and astronauts. The Soviets had been kicking ass early on. Sputnik, Gagarin. America a win, a big one. President Kennedy had thrown down the gauntlet years earlier, land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade is out. Talk about pressure. So landing on the moon wasn't just science, it was pure, uncut geopolitical strategy. It was about showing the world who was top dog in technology, in power, in sheer audacity. The historical significance? It's almost impossible to overstate. For a brief moment it felt like humanity was united, looking up at the stars with a sense of wonder. It pushed technology forward in ways we can't even imagine: material science, computing, telecommunications. Think about the computers they used. Less power than your damn phone. And they navigated to the moon and back. It was a testament to human ingenuity, to what we can do when we put our collective minds to something absolutely insane. It inspired a generation to dream big, to pursue science and engineering. But here's the kicker, and this is where it gets interesting. Almost as soon as the dust settled, or didn't settle, depending on who you ask, the questions started. Was it all too perfect? Too Hollywood? Could they really pull off something that complex with 1960s tech? This event, meant to be a unifying moment, also birthed one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of all time. And that, my friends, is a wild story in itself. We're still talking about it today, more than 50 years later. That's something, isn't it? The sheer staying power of that doubt. So, let's dive into the stuff that makes people raise an eyebrow. The photographs and videos. This is where a lot of the IT was faked arguments really gained traction. One of the biggest ones? No stars in the sky. Think about it. You're on the moon, no atmosphere to block the view. The sky should be blazing with stars, right? Like a crazy psychedelic tapestry. Yet in all those iconic photos, the lunar sky is pitch black. Critics say, aha! They filmed it in a studio and forgot to turn on the star machine. It's a compelling point if you don't dig deeper, makes you wonder. Then there's the American flag. You've seen it. Armstrong and Aldrin planting it. And it looks like it's waving. Waving, on the moon, where there's no air, no breeze. How does a flag wave in a vacuum? Conspiracy theorists jump on this. See? Proof. There was a fan in the studio. Or they filmed it on Earth. It's another one of those visual things that just feels off to some people. It's an easy image to pick on, because everyone knows a flag needs wind to wave. It's almost too good to be true for the doubters. A real smoking gun. Or so they claim. And the shadows, man, the shadows are a whole rabbit hole. In some photos, the shadows cast by the astronauts in the lunar module seem to go in different directions. They're not parallel. If the sun is the only light source, shouldn't all shadows line up perfectly, like they do on a sunny day here on Earth? Detractors argue this suggests multiple light sources like studio lighting. They say it's a dead giveaway. Some shadows are super sharp, others are fuzzy. It's these inconsistencies that fuel the fire, making people think something fishy was going on with the lighting setup. Another photographic puzzle that gets tossed around is the issue of crosshairs. Some of the NASA photos have these little plus marks, the crosshairs from the camera's targeting system. In certain images, these crosshairs appear to be objects in the photo, which is physically impossible if they're part of the camera lens. How can a marking on the lens be hidden by something in the scene? People say this is evidence of doctoring, of images being cut and pasted or manipulated after the fact. It's these little details, these apparent imperfections that conspiracy theorists grab onto and say this whole thing stinks. Beyond just the photos, there are other technical questions that keep popping up. Take the lunar module, the LEM. This thing supposedly landed on the moon. But look at the footage, look at the pictures. There's no massive blast crater underneath it. If this thing came down firing a powerful rocket engine to slow its descent, shouldn't there be a huge hole, or at least a significant disturbance in the lunar soil? Skeptics point to this lack of a crater as proof that the LEM was just a prop, gently lowered onto a pre-prepared set. It's a visual that seems to defy common sense for many. Then there's the lunar rover, the moon buggy they drove around in on later missions. That thing was folded up like crazy origami to fit on the LM. People question how astronauts in those bulky, clumsy spacesuits could unfold and assemble such a complex vehicle. Have you ever tried to put together IKEA furniture with thick winter gloves on? Now imagine doing it in a pressurized suit with limited dexterity. Some find it hard to believe they could manage it so smoothly. The engineering is impressive, almost impressive for some to accept without a healthy dose of skepticism. The Van Allen radiation belts are another huge one. These are zones of charged particles trapped by Earth's magnetic field. To get to the moon, the astronauts had to pass right through them. Critics argue that the radiation levels in these belts are so intense that they would have cooked the astronauts or at least made them incredibly sick, even with the spacecraft's shielding. They say NASA downplayed the danger or that the shielding described wouldn't have been nearly enough. It's a very scientific-sounding argument, and it can be pretty persuasive if you're not a particle physicist. It sounds like a legitimate barrier. And what about the sheer technological leap? In 1960 we were barely putting people in orbit. 9 years later we're landing them on another celestial body and bringing them back? That's an insane ramp-up in capability. Some people just find that timeline too quick, too convenient, especially given the intense pressure of the Cold War. They wonder if, when faced with the possibility of failure or falling behind the Soviets, the decision was made to simulate the success, instead of risking a very public, very costly disaster. The giant leap might have been too giant, too fast for some to swallow. So, if we entertain the idea, just for a second, that it faked, the biggest question is, why? Why would they go to such incredible lengths to pull off a deception of this magnitude? The number one answer usually comes down to the Cold War. America was locked in this ideological, technological, and military pissing contest with the Soviet Union. The space race was a massive part of that. The Soviets had scored early victories, Sputnik in '57, Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, in '61. America was playing catch-up and the pressure was immense. President Kennedy had made that bold promise in 1961 before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. That's a hell of a deadline. Imagine the political fallout if they failed. Imagine the propaganda victory for the Soviets. Some theorists propose that as the decade neared its end, and perhaps the technical challenges were proving insurmountable or too risky, the temptation to fake it to win the race, to demoralize the Soviets, and to restore American pride and prestige might have been overwhelming. It's a high-stakes game, and desperate times call for desperate measures, or so the theory goes. Think about the money, too. Billions of dollars were poured into the Apollo program. That's 1960s billions, which is like zillions today. If the program was on the verge of a catastrophic failure, faking a success could be seen as a way to justify that colossal expenditure to the American taxpayers. It could also distract from other problems at home, like the Vietnam War, which was deeply unpopular and tearing the country apart. A spectacular triumph in space would be a much-needed morale boost, a unifying event, even if it wasn't entirely genuine. It's a cynical view, but politics can be a cynical business. But then you hit the big wall. How could so many people keep such a monumental secret? Estimates vary, but something like 400,000 people were involved in the Apollo program. Scientists, engineers, technicians, contractors, astronauts. Could of them be in on it, or be silenced so effectively for over half a century? That's where the theory gets really tricky. Proponents suggest maybe only a tiny inner circle knew the full truth, and the rest were working on compartmentalized parts, unaware of the bigger picture. Or maybe, just maybe, the fear of repercussions, or even a misguided sense of patriotism, kept lips sealed. It's a tough nut to crack, that cone of silence argument. Alright, so we've heard the doubts about the photos. Let's flip the script and look at what the scientists and NASA folks say. That no stars thing? They argue it's all about camera exposure. The lunar surface, lit by the bright sun, and the astronauts' white suits were incredibly bright. To get a good picture of them without everything being washed out, they had to use very short exposure times and small apertures. Stars, while bright, are relatively faint. They just wouldn't show up under those camera settings. It's like trying to take a picture of stars during the daytime on Earth. Your camera's focused on the bright landscape. And the waving flag? This one's pretty straightforward, according to the pro-landing side. The flag was mounted on a telescoping pole with a horizontal bar along the top to make it fly proudly, even in the vacuum of space. Think of a curtain rod. That bar is what gives it the flying look. Any ripples or waves were because the flag had been folded up tightly for the journey and hadn't been perfectly smoothed out. Plus, when the astronauts were planting it, they twisted the pole into the ground, causing the flag to move. That movement in a vacuum with no air resistance could persist for a bit. No wind needed, just physics. What about those non-parallel shadows, suggesting multiple light sources? The explanation here is perspective and terrain. The moon's surface isn't a perfectly flat studio floor, it's got hills, craters, and undulations. These slight variations in the ground level can make parallel shadows appear to converge or diverge, just like railway tracks seem to meet in the distance. It's an optical illusion, amplified by the wide-angle lenses used in many of the photos, which can distort perspective at the edges. One powerful, distant light source, the sun, is all you need to create the shadows seen. Then there's the issue of the crosshairs appearing objects. This one sounds damning, but the explanation is often about overexposure and image duplication. In very bright areas of a photograph, the emulsion on the film can get so saturated that the image of a bright object can bleed over the much thinner black crosshair line, making it seem like the crosshair is behind it. Also, many of the images we see online are copies of copies, sometimes from scans of prints, and details can get lost or misinterpreted. Original film analysis usually clears these up. It's about understanding the photographic process, not just looking at a JPG. Section 6. Rocket Science and Moondust, Addressing the Technical Nightmares. Now let's tackle those technical impossibilities that the skeptics bring up. The missing blast crater under the lunar module. NASA scientists explain that the LAM's engine throttled down significantly during the final moments of descent, plus the moon has no atmosphere, so the exhaust plume spread out much wider than it would on Earth, dispersing the force. The lunar soil, or regolith, is also very fine and compact just below the surface. So instead of a deep crater, you'd expect more of a shallow dishing effect and some dust kicked up, which is what they say happened. It wasn't like a bomb going off. The Van Allen belts, and their supposedly lethal radiation, this is a serious point, but NASA says they planned for it. The spacecraft, particularly the command module, had shielding designed to protect the astronauts. More importantly, the trajectory chosen for the Apollo missions took them through the belts relatively quickly, and through areas where the radiation intensity was lower. The astronauts did receive some radiation, of course, and wore dosimeters to measure it, but the doses were well within acceptable limits for short-term exposure. It wasn't a casual stroll, but it was calculated and managed. As for assembling the lunar rover with bulky gloves, yeah, that sounds tough. But those astronauts trained for years for every single aspect of the mission. They practiced these procedures over and over again in simulated environments, including underwater to mimic lower gravity. The rover itself was brilliantly engineered with large, easy-to-handle deployment mechanisms. Think D-rings, pull cords, not tiny screws. It was designed specifically to be assembled by astronauts in pressurized suits. It was a feat of engineering, sure, but not an impossible one given the preparation and design. And that rapid technological advancement from 1960 to 1969, it was incredible, no doubt. But it wasn't out of nowhere. It built on decades of rocketry research, some of it admittedly from German scientists after World War II. The massive funding for Apollo accelerated everything. It was a national priority, with some of the brightest minds in the country working on it. When you throw that much brainpower and resources at a problem, you can achieve extraordinary things. It's a testament to focus and investment, not necessarily a sign of something being faked. The pressure was immense, but so was the drive to succeed. Section 7. The world was watching and listening. Proof we actually went. Beyond NASA's own explanations, there's a mountain of independent evidence that supports the moon landings being real. Think about this. The Soviet Union, America's biggest rival, was tracking the Apollo missions with their own sophisticated equipment. If the US was faking it, the Soviets would have been the first to scream bloody murder and expose the whole thing. It would have been the propaganda coup of the century for them. But they didn't. They acknowledged the American achievement, albeit grudgingly. Their silence on any fakery is pretty deafening, man. Then you've got the moon rocks. Astronauts brought back hundreds of pounds of lunar samples, 382 kilograms to be exact, over the course of the Apollo missions. These rocks have been analyzed by scientists all over the world, in labs completely independent of NASA. And guess what? They're unique. They have isotopic compositions, mineralogy, and an exposure history to cosmic rays that are completely different from any rocks found on Earth. They even contain isotopes created by solar wind particles, which can only happen on a body with no atmosphere like the moon. You can't just fake that kind of specific geology on a global scale. And get this, we left stuff on the moon that we can still interact with. The Apollo missions deployed retroreflectors, basically special mirrors. Scientists on Earth from various countries and institutions can, and do, bounce laser beams off these reflectors to precisely measure the distance to the moon. This experiment has been ongoing for decades. If those reflectors aren't there, how is this happening? Are all these observatories in on the conspiracy too? That stretches belief to its breaking point for most people. It's tangible, measurable evidence. And let's not forget the human element. We're not just talking about the 12 guys who walked on the moon, we're talking about the hundreds of thousands of people who worked on the Apollo program. Engineers, scientists, technicians, factory workers. To keep a conspiracy of that scale secret for over 50 years, with no credible deathbed confessions, no leaked documents that stand up to scrutiny, it's just incredibly improbable. People talk, secrets get out, especially secrets that big. The sheer logistical nightmare of faking it and keeping it quiet would arguably be harder than actually going. Section 8. Why do we still doubt the conspiracy that just won't quit? So, if there's so much evidence pointing to the moon landings being real, why does this conspiracy theory persist? Why, even in 2025, are we still talking about it? I think part of it is just human nature. We love a good story, especially a story that involves secrets, cover-ups, and powerful institutions potentially lying to us. It's more exciting, more intriguing, than just accepting the official narrative. It taps into that part of us that questions authority, that wonders if there's more going on behind the scenes. And let's be honest, a faked moon landing is a hell of a story. There's also a deep-seated distrust of government and official institutions for some folks, and you can't always blame them. History is littered with examples of governments misleading their people, from small fibs to massive deceptions. So when something as monumental and almost unbelievable as landing on the moon happens, especially with the backdrop of the Cold War, it's fertile ground for skepticism. If they lied about other things, people ask, why wouldn't they lie about this? It's a seed of doubt that, once planted, can be really hard to uproot. The internet has obviously played a massive role in keeping these theories alive and spreading them to new generations. You can find endless videos, forums, and articles meticulously picking apart photos and testimonies. Confirmation bias is a powerful thing. If you're inclined to believe it was faked, you'll find plenty of evidence online to support your view, and you'll probably dismiss the counter-arguments. Echo chambers form, and these ideas get reinforced. It's easier than ever to find a community that shares your skepticism, no matter how outlandish the idea might seem to others. And sometimes, I think it's just hard for people to grasp the sheer scale of human achievement. Landing on the moon was an almost superhuman feat of engineering, courage, and determination. It's easier, in a strange way, to believe it was a trick, a movie, than to accept that humanity, with all its flaws, managed to pull off something so incredibly audacious with relatively primitive technology. It's almost like we're more comfortable with grand deceptions than with grand accomplishments. It's a weird quirk of our psychology, perhaps. The sheer audacity of the achievement makes it ripe for disbelief. Section 9, the final frontier of truth. So where do we land on this? So, we've looked at both sides of this crazy coin. On one hand, you've got the doubters pointing to weird photos, questionable shadows, and the sheer unlikelihood of it all. They ask legitimate-sounding questions about flags waving in no wind, missing stars, and the technological hurdles. They paint a picture of a government desperate to win the Cold War, willing to stage the ultimate show. It's a narrative of deception, of a grand illusion that fooled the world. And you gotta admit, some of their points at first glance make you pause and think, that is weird. On the other hand, you have the overwhelming scientific consensus. The physical evidence like moon rocks analyzed worldwide, and the independent verification from other countries including rivals like the Soviet Union. There are explanations for almost every anomaly the skeptics point out. Camera settings, perspective, the nature of the lunar environment, you've got laser reflectors still being pinged on the moon today. And then there are the thousands upon thousands of people who worked on the project, whose collective silence on a hoax of this magnitude would be a conspiracy in itself, perhaps even more unbelievable than the landing itself. The weight of evidence, if you look at it objectively, seems to fall heavily on the side of we actually went. Modern lunar orbiters have even taken high-resolution pictures of the landing sites, showing the descent stages of the LEMs, rovers, and even astronaut footprints, still there after all these decades. It's pretty compelling stuff. Yet, the doubts persist, fueled by mistrust, the allure of a good conspiracy, and the sheer difficulty of comprehending such a monumental undertaking. It's a testament to how a compelling counter-narrative, once it takes root, can be incredibly difficult to dislodge regardless of the facts. Ultimately, where you land on this probably says as much about how you see the world, and how much faith you put in institutions versus individual questioning as it does about the evidence itself. But here's a wild thought to leave you with. In an age of deepfakes, AI-generated realities, and an avalanche of information and misinformation, how will we discern the truth about future monumental events? The moon landing controversy, in a way, was a precursor to the challenges we face today in sifting fact from fiction. So, did we go? Or did we just get really, really good at making movies? The debate, for some, will probably continue until we're setting up colonies there. And maybe even then. Wild, isn't it?